All right, well, let's go ahead and jump in and at least start with introductions for our panel. So once again, this is when conflict becomes combat, anatomy, weaponry, choreography, oh my. Seasoned storytellers compare common pitfalls, tactics, and considerations for writing plausible and gripping fight scenes. So we're going to have a wonderful group. We already have a wonderful group of successful and award-winning authors to discuss this topic. So why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves. Melissa, we can start with you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, and it would be great if you can include in your introduction your favorite fight scene of all time, or at least top 5.
Sure. All right. So, and this is Star. I'm Melissa Caruso. I'm the author of the Swords and Fire trilogy from Orbit Books, which starts with The Tethered Mage. And I also have a new trilogy coming out starting June in just a few weeks with The Obsidian Tower. And as for my favorite, so I hate picking my favorite anything because my brain freezes up and I can't, but what if I'm forgetting something? But I will say that a very influential, if we're talking about book combat as opposed to screen combat, which I think tends to stick with us more because it's so visual, but an influential book combat on me as a young writer was in Robin McKinley's Hero in the Crown, Aaron versus Mar, because just she goes into it so prepared and it goes so badly and so wrong, and there's just and there's such high emotional stakes in that combat, and then finally what gets her to pull it out is being worried about her horse, and just I read that book 400 times and I love it, and so that's one that definitely really stuck with me in a formative sort of way.
Wonderful. Valerie?
Hi, I am Valerie Valdez, author of Chilling Effect and the forthcoming Prime Deceptions. Those are both space operas, and so the fights that tend to happen in them are usually a little more pew pew, punch punch, as opposed to sword fights. My favorite fight scene. Wow, I'm trying to think. Because like Melissa was saying, immediately I went to a movie. It was like, oh man, this one. I guess I'll go with that since we're just chatting. But I just want to say, yeah, that fight with Aaron, oh my gosh, that's still, as soon as you started talking about it, my heart started pounding because I remember it so vividly and exactly all of the preparation that she did, the months and months of figuring out the formula for the, oh my gosh. Anyway, so yeah, the first fight scene that always pops into my head when people ask me about them is the back alley fight in SPL, aka Killzone, which is a Hong Kong movie. And it is a fight between Donnie Yen, who's amazing, and he's wielding basically a police baton, and the other guy has a knife. This is a modern film, and so it's just this. It's basically a back alley knife fight. It's amazing, and the two of them are just going at it. The guy with the knife has killed Donnie Yen's partner, and he is just a total psychopath. Donnie Yen is like fed up, it's that part of the movie, and it is a brutal knockdown fight. And watching it always just gets my heart racing as well. So that's a good one.
It's all about the adrenaline, right? That's why we watch this. That's why we write this.
Yeah.
So Henry and Fran, I've told from both of them they should be coming on in soon. So to start off on another, you say write what you know, right? So has anyone ever actually been in a fight?
So yes and no. I'm a LARPer, so
Okay.
I have
Okay.
actually trying to murder each other fight, but I have been in many fake fights with foam weapons, where we are trying to pretend murder each other very hard. So and there's some ways that helps, and there's some ways it doesn't. Obviously, I mean, you're using a foam sword instead of a steel one. No one is actually getting hurt. In fact, you're trying very hard not to actually hurt each other. So it's a little different. There are some things that I feel have really been helpful, like just things like small unit tactics and understanding things like the difference that terrain and weather and visibility and things like that can make, and just what you're wearing and how that interacts with how you're fighting and things like that. So I try to always be aware of where my experience applies and where it does not apply, and draw appropriately on one part but not the other.
Definitely. How about you, Valerie?
Yeah. Same answer, basically, yes and no. I did martial arts when I was much younger, and so definitely I sparred in martial arts scenarios, and it was, we were not padded. We wore helmets, but that was it. And so we would definitely go to town on each other in those kinds of situations. But my other experience is HEMA longsword training, which I did not get to the point where I started doing fights. And so it was all very much just kind of like careful back and forth, learning your tempo, your distance, that kind of thing. And I also did stage combat. And so once again, same thing where it's like, yeah, sometimes we would go out back with, you know, wiffle bats or foam swords and wail on each other. But otherwise, it was all very kind of carefully scripted and choreographed. And the goal there was to not win the fight, because that's not the point, but to make sure the audience could see everything that was happening and follow all the beats of the fight. And also the strong emphasis, which is going to come up in one of the other questions we have later, was always on selling the reactions, which was one of the most important things about stage combat. Because if you don't sell the reaction, then they're not going to believe that the fight's real, and then you've lost them. So.
No, that's a really good point. And I'll actually segue into what I think the question you were referring to was, which is, for a newer writer, it can be tempting to just use what they call in theater the blocking, right? Which is like, you know, he just throws this punch and then he pulls this trigger, and it can feel a little stale because it just sounds like a, you know, a list of certain actions. So how do you really incorporate that like visceral emotional experience of what it's like to be in a fight, and really kind of deliver that in your writing?
Yeah, that is actually the question that I meant. So let me skip forward to my notes. Well, obviously, I just alluded to part of it that I think is really important is selling those reactions. There's a lot of times that when you get very focused on the blocking and what's happening to who and who's doing what, you lose the focus on how are they reacting to the things that are happening to them. How are they reacting to the hits that they're taking? How are they reacting to the wounds that they may be accumulating slowly over the course of the fight? You know, in a real fight, let's be real, it's often just very fast. I mean, it goes quickly, your brain may not click in, but at the same time, as soon as you kind of take a second, you're going to be feeling something. You may be just adrenaline, maybe that's it, but making sure that they're selling the reactions. You know, if they take a punch to the kidney, what does their body do? How do they react? How do they act? If they get a blow to the head, what is happening inside of them? Or can they see anymore? You know, are their ears ringing? Like things like that, to make sure that you're not just, you know, who hit who and where and how, but how did it make them feel? How did they react to it? That can be vital, definitely, in making sure that you're, you know, getting out of that sort of very mechanical stuff.
Yeah. How about you, Melissa? Do you have something to add?
Yeah. A couple of things. One, I know that for me anyway, when I do my first drafts tend to be like that with a lot of the blocking, because I just have to figure out what's physically happening in the fight. And then I go back and edit it. And sometimes I'll edit out half of those parries and ripostes and stuff because they don't really matter. What really matters is sort of the key turning points in the fight. But the other thing I would add is, in addition to the physical reaction, the sort of emotional and mental reactions, in that okay, who is your character? How experienced are they with combat? Are they going to like freeze up and panic? Is it just going to be overwhelming? Or are they more experienced? They're going to be able to roll with it. Even if they are, sometimes things will hit you by surprise. And then, you know, that's always very disconcerting, but also where their emotional stakes are in the fight. Like if your friend gets hurt, no matter how much of a badass you are, there's going to be that moment of like, oh no, you know, and or is there some important objective that you're trying to accomplish, or on a I don't know if I necessarily lighter, but another way to complicate a fight and to keep character in it. Is there some other emotional stake? Like, is there someone you're trying to impress, and maybe their character's making bad decisions because they're like, "Oh, I have to impress this person," and then, you know, and then they wind up messing up as a result. Or is there someone they're particularly like, you know, intimidated by, or do they have some other emotional stakes going on here where like, oh no, I have to be careful while I'm fighting not to break my precious fragile heirloom that my dead friend gave me, and so I'm protecting this pouch that it's in, even though that doesn't matter for saving my life. You know, there's lots of ways, that lots of feelings that you may have, and just sort of think through what your character's emotional stakes and emotional objectives are, and that can be even more important than whether you're parrying high or parrying low.
Yeah, and then when in doubt, POV fixes everything. So always kind of just default back to who is your character, what would they focus on, what would they know, what do they care about in that moment, what are the stakes for them? Like as soon as you can pull back to that, then, you know, focusing on that will keep the audience engaged usually.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about what happens before the fight scene. So, how do you foreshadow the fact that you're going to have this combat in your book? Because the temptation for anyone who might be new to writing a story is to put it right up front. We start en media res, they're duking it out like from the first line. And I'm sure that could work, but what are some of the pitfalls of taking that approach? And if you don't take that approach, how do you still promise in the beginning of your book that this juicy stuff is coming?
Melissa, you want to go first?
Absolutely. So I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is I think it is always important to establish character at least a bit first before you jump into a fight, because you have to know what they do have at stake. Even books that feel like they start with a fight, a lot of times if you go look at them, there's just even a couple of little pages up front before the action starts where you get a sense of, okay, who is this person? What do they care about? And and then you care about them so much more than if you just come in and it's like, Grom felt the blade punch through his kidneys. Oh no, like you don't really care about Grom at this point. So, oh well, if he's dead, it doesn't really matter. So even if you just have a little bit up front to get them invested first, it can make a huge difference. And I think the other thing in terms of leading up to a fight, I don't know if this is directly on the question, but in terms of foreshadowing a fight. So one thing that when I see it done well, it is just the best thing in the world is, so if a fight is not by surprise, there tends to be this sort of lead up where maybe there's going to be a fight, maybe there's not going to be a fight. Is somebody going to jump in? Going to start it? Like, or then there comes the point where, oh yeah, there's going to be a fight, but it still hasn't started. And you can just feel that ramp up. And there's a couple of movies I can think of, and I know we're talking books, but that have done this exceptionally well. One is in Tombstone, the OK Corral fight, where it's, oh, are we going to do this? Are we going to do this? And then Doc Holliday sets it off with that wink, and just right at the person who's most going to break, and sets it off and starts it when he wants to start it, and it's beautiful. And the other one is in I think Winter Soldier, the elevator fight, where these people who are just really built, ripped, clearly not random elevator riders, are getting on the elevator, and you see Cap looking around like, and that moment where he goes, okay, before we start, does anyone want to get off? And just so good. And that sort of, I love it when people have that kind of ramp up, because most people can't just launch from zero to stabbing or shooting. It takes a bit to sort of get yourself up to that. And there is that sort of almost negotiation of, are we going to do this? Are we going to do this beforehand? And it can be so beautiful when it's done well.
That's fantastic. We're so excited to be joined by Fran and Henry. They're underneath me in my view.
I'm glad to be here. We were stuck in check-in lockdown, quarantine. Finally got cleared. We're cootie free.
Decontamination procedure is complete.
Are we talking about favorite fight scenes still?
We can do that.
This is your chance. In your introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us your favorite fight scene. So, Fran, we'll start with you.
Okay. Hi, you guys. I'm Fran Wild. I am the author of 8 books now, 3 of which are the Bone Universe series, which infamously started with a winged knife fight in a wind tunnel by 2 characters who were fighting for the right to speak. I love fight scenes. I had never written even a punch before I wrote that one. So it was a whole learning experience, but I got some really great help from a lot of different people. And I I remember talking at Viable Paradise, where I was a student. I went in 2011. I was class of VP 15, and we were talking about our favorite fight scenes. And I have 3. So you can kind of see the echoes of them in the Bone universe, because the fights come sort of in different ways. My 3 top fight scenes are 1, the fight in the Maidenhead in Firefly, where River Tam just basically kicks ass. I think I love choreographed fight scenes. They make me really happy. Anything with Jet Li, anything. I mean, the man can kick backwards over his head. So I'm completely happy with that. And then the 3rd fight scene is actually the fight scene from Paradise Lost, when Satan gets thrown out of heaven, because it's beautifully done. It's done in verse. Milton was a jerk, but I like the way he writes a fight scene among angels and devils. So, also that was biblical fanfic from way back.
That's great. How about you, Henry?
Hi, I'm Henry Leanne. I am an author mostly of middle grade novels now. My current series is called Sprout Chen, and thank you, Fran. And it's about a 14-year-old girl and her little brother who leave their homeland to come to an island on which there's an academy that teaches a very unusual sport combining figure skating with kung fu. And it's very much about kung fu figure skating. And I'm struggling to answer this question because I know we're supposed to be humble, and our default idling mode is to be humble. I'm trying to be a more humble person. My favorite fight scenes are actually from my own books, but I'll say before that, things that influenced me the most were the fight scenes in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because they were really conversations. Each one was about a change, not just the characters finding out the dynamics between them, but watching them change. I'm a big fan of the I Ching, and the I Ching is all about states of change. So if you watch every fight scene in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, they enter into the scene as one dynamic, and the dynamic shifts by the end of the scene. So it really is this wonderful synthesis of character and action. So that was what influenced me in writing my own action scenes. But also the final boss battle of Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. If anybody's played that, it's just this masterful escalation of stages and use of the environment that really inspired my writing action sequences as well.
Okay, Henry talking about boss battles is one of my favorite things so far today.
Oh my God.
I actually had a question related to boss battles, and it was about this idea of tropes in fight scenes. So the boss battle is a trope, and it can take on kind of like a David and Goliath, right? And then in like a heist novel, there's usually like a chase or a shootout. So what are some other examples of tropes in fight scenes, if we know of any?
The quasi-fatal stab, not just the fake stab, but the one where you're dead, you're totally dead, but no, you're not.
Inigo Montoya, man, when he takes that, stab, you're like, no, and then you're like, yes.
Definitely. Henry?
One that I love is where best friends have to fight each other because of competing values, or because circumstances have thrown them into that. That is a common trope. It's one I never get tired of. And I will always have at least one of those in every one of my books.
I love non-weapon weapons too. I love people fighting with things that aren't supposed to be fought with. Not just chairs, not just, the hard stuff, but like, pasta noodles and just like cooking implements and things, not the knives, of course.
Rubber chickens, whatever, man.
Yeah,
Jackie Chan will grab anything that is nearby.
Yes, I mean, the fact is that you fight with whatever's closest to hand.
Right.
And if you're smart enough, you'll have something reachable that's sharp and pointy, but if not, then you fight with rubber chicken.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's a good segue into, we had a question about what are different considerations that you need to think about when you're using different kinds of weapons, right? Because there's martial arts, which we've touched on, but then there's like, really interesting like sci-fi vaporizers or OP things like Avada Kedavra. Like what are some experiences in writing with just a variety of weaponry that you've had to think about as you've developed some of your scenes?
I think one of the main things is keeping in mind sort of the basics of a fight, depending on what kind of fight it is. I know Fran had wanted to talk about more like bigger space battles, so I'll defer to her on that one. But in more kind of personal quarters, even if you're across the room from each other, just knowing your distances, your tempos, how long does it take to throw a rubber chicken versus throwing a punch? How does the hit land versus one thing versus the other? How fast can you cover the ground between you if you need to cover that ground, or how many shots can you get off before your bullets run out? Things like that. Just keeping in mind kind of the physical limitations of the scene, not just the structure of it, the blocking, but also just where are they existing in the space that they're taking up, and how does that affect the choices that they make throughout the course of the fight?
Two things. Yeah. Keep track of your hands. I tend to write many more hands than I actually have. And so people are punching and throwing, and yeah, there's not enough hands for that. And the other is physics. when I was writing the wind tunnel scenes, especially, I actually got in a wind tunnel, which was a lot harder to do back then. Now, well, not now, but recently you could go to a lot of big malls and get in a wind tunnel. But I went to the one that the West Point Academy was using for its skydiving team, and I got in that one. And what I discovered was every motion that you make throws you in a a new direction. So you have to sort of fight in a couple of different ways, and it is like a dance or a conversation. Physics on ice would be the same thing, just the ways in which your environment impact you and the ways in which you interact with your environment as you're fighting. If you throw something, you're going to get shoved backwards.
Yeah. I know another thing that I think I always that can be a challenge to keep in mind is if you put a weapon into a fight, you have to make sure people are using it in an intelligent way. Like if you've given your characters really powerful magic or really big guns or whatever, and they're not using them, like once you've given that character that capability, you need to account for it, because there's nothing worse than like, well, okay, why wasn't your mage just blasting them with lightning during this fight? Why was he standing back and crocheting or something? So that's always a little bit, that can be a little bit tricky, especially because I think sometimes in science fiction and fantasy, we tend to keep upping the ante with our characters' capabilities, and you want to be careful not to write yourself into a corner where you really need someone to get stabbed, but it's not realistic that they would.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So speaking of characters, Melissa, you had a great point before about like making sure that you're registering character reactions to things that happen in fights. And something that I'm thinking about, since we also talked about, that final stab where you're like, is he dead? Is he not? How do you keep a fight scene realistic in terms of the hits that someone can take? But also like, kind of making it really intense. So I know if I got punched, that would be it for me, right? But what's between that and the scene in Monty Python where the rabbit just keeps like biting the limbs off, and he keeps fighting, So how do you balance that?
I'll speak to that one. I kind of cheated and put an edict on myself that there would be no deaths and no serious injuries in my books to kind of avoid that question, because I am writing middle grade right now. I kind of went with the territory. And just to segue from the last question about use of weaponry, there's an interesting dynamic in young people's literature, and that is that if you have combat without weapons, it's action. If you have combat with weapons, it's violence. And my publisher very much wanted to have freehand combat so that it would just be action and not violence. And that kind of solved the problem for me, in that they're not going to be doing fatal harm to each other. But yeah, so I kind of cheated. So I don't have a good, I don't know why I'm talking then. I don't have a good answer to that. One of the things that I did think about though is that how do you create tension without death? That's something I have thought a lot about for various reasons. And I think that there are many ways to do it. If you look at, if you bring the environment smaller, let's say, like a junior high school type of environment, you can have things that feel like life and death without them being life and death. So it's a matter of the scale that you're working on, what the stakes are in relationship to the scale. If this is a small world, those small stakes can feel large without life and death. So I guess that's my contribution to the question.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
As what people, oh, sorry. As for what the people can take, one interesting dynamic is like, okay, in a fight, there's what will actually put you down versus what will take you out of the fight effectively. Like a little stupid cut on your hand can take you out of the fight if you are a sword fighter and can't use your sword. Or like a foot injury so that you're not mobile. Can take you out of the fight, because the fight can go over there and I'm stuck here because I have a sprained ankle and I can't limp fast enough to keep up. And so taking someone out of the fight whereas you could have a very serious injury potentially that's going to be worse for you in the long term and potentially keep fighting through it. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that, of course, you have to keep in mind is what counts as dangerous and potentially lethal really depends on the magical and technological medical options that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, if you're in a gritty, grimdark, like, you know, hacksaws and leeches kind of fantasy, then people can get infected and die from stupid little cuts. Whereas if you have like flesh repair nanites in your system that are going to close up that, you know, hole, and there's also just genre tropes. Like if I'm reading a shonen manga and someone gets a hole blasted through their chest that I can stick my arm through, I fully expect the next panel just cough up some blood and keep going. Like there doesn't even need to be an explanation. It's just the genre we're in and we're gonna roll with it. So I think
But I think what Melissa's talking about though is context. Like we know what to expect. If you've got a character who is down, so down, and suddenly magical throwing save, and no, they're not down, they're back. It's not going to work in the context unless there's already this situation established. If you teach us how to read the fight before the fight happens, so that there's pieces of context established, then you'll be more believable. And I think that's part of what we're talking about throughout so far is the believability of a fight. It's not just how well written it is or how well blocked it is, but that, you know, that your readers really buy it. And that doesn't mean that you have to have every single detail written crisply. It's just that, you know, you have some major beats. Maybe you've talked to a first responder or someone to understand what a head blow will actually do to your character. And if you have, say, a 4'10" tall person picking up a 4'10" tall sword, you have established prior to this that there are physics in that universe that allow it, because some of us notice those things a lot when we try and pick up our own 4'10" tall sword and cannot do it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Fran, you mentioned, you know, talking to a first responder to find out, you know, what a head injury would actually be like. Have you gone about other ways of studying anatomy in order to better inform your fight scenes? I've heard that students at Seton Hill's MFA program actually get to study cadavers as part of the writing program. So what has anyone had experiences in, you know, really trying to figure out, you know, how does the body work? How do I, you know, what would actually happen in order to make a fight scene more believable? Henry?
Fran, raise your hand first.
Okay. Go ahead,
I was just gonna say, I was trained as a first responder. I was a lifeguard, and so I dealt with a lot of the water side injuries. But we also did, as part of the Red Cross series of programs that we worked with. I was a camp counselor. This is what we did for fun in the summer. Was dealing with sort of how to repair various injuries. So that hands-on, on the fly, what do you have that can deal with some really gross stuff is worth it. Go take a first aid course. It helps you out. It helps your community out. Even if there's babysitter classes that are great for that too. But that's the first step. Get an anatomy book. Get some books that are nonfiction about the impact of war and fight scenes, and just start absorbing. And yeah, talk to people who are experts in the field, experts in the fighting system that you want to try and use. That I think is a lot easier these days than asking first responders for their time. But you know, write a note, ask the question before it comes up, or before somebody you know, asks you once the book has been printed. It's a lot easier to fix a fight scene before it goes to print.
definitely.
To leap off from what Fran was talking about doing your homework, I had a conversation with myself at the beginning of writing my Peace Production books, and that was, what relationship do I want to have with reality? Because if you look at, I'm drawing from Chinese and Taiwanese and Japanese lore, and there is this strange fantasy sits in this strange place in that lore. So you will have things that are about the first emperor of China that are historical. That are historically based, but they will have, you know, wired flying fight scenes. Like the film Hero, for example, is based on actual events and an actual historical figure, but it's got wired foo all over it. And somehow the inclusion of the fantastical fighting element does not dilute the poignance of the historical lesson. And that was a particular mix that I thought was true to my own heritage that I wanted to capture in my books, but I wanted to be able to do it selectively. So I came up with this idea for Kung Fu figure skating, which sounds inherently wacky, and I'm not into wacky. I don't particularly like it. That's not my sense of humor, and I don't have any sense of humor, so I didn't want to do wacky. And I wanted to do, I wanted to be able to select. I wanted to be able to deliberately select my relationship with realism and with fantasy. And so I actually took 6 months of Kung Fu and figure skating classes as homework. Going back to what Fran was saying about doing your research, and it was enlightening because I had just plucked these two sports out of the air, Kung Fu figure skating, and mashed them together as kind of a fanboy exercise, just putting the things that I thought would be cool in one convenient place. But when I took Kung Fu and figure skating classes, now I went into it thinking, I'm a pretty fit guy. How hard can this be? Famous last words. And I found that I was appalling at both Kung Fu and figure skating. And there would be these little kids, mostly female, that would be around me, and they would be executing everything flawlessly while I would literally be on my butt. And so I realized in doing this 6 months of research that these were two sports I had plucked out of the air that rewarded balance and flexibility far more than brute strength. So I had created this fictitious sport that actually rewarded girl power and kid power, and rewarded the ways that bodies are built differently. And so that kind of had to pull it back and realize that this is something that is about seeming disadvantage turned to advantage, and then that became the heart of the story. That heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that was not what I was expecting going into these lessons. And so it was quite humbling and a huge gift to do that research. So I would encourage everybody to do some research and homework in developing whatever fighting system you're coming up with. It could write your story for you.
It's awesome.
So I have a question about what happens potentially when you don't do your research. Have any of you read or even written, if you're willing to share, any gaffes, even comical gaffes, mistakes in a fight scene?
One of my pet peeves, one of my pet peeves is when they have sword fights where somebody spins around in the middle of a sword fight and turns their back to their opponent, which I know looks very flashy, but like it is the last thing you would ever want to do, because it just gives somebody a free shot at your back. I don't mind when people do it in TV or movies, or because it looks cool. I'm willing, okay, whatever. But yeah, you see it all the time, or does a backflip or something. Like, who has time when you're trying not to get killed to do a backflip? Unless
spectacle.
much better than the person you're fighting, because you're incredibly an expert and they've just picked up a sword, you're not going to be pulling any fancy.
Hi all, I just want to let you know it's the 15-minute mark.
Thanks, Gary.
Sure.
Anyone else heard any gaffes they want to share, pet peeves?
I will say that I have a fondness for using headbutts, despite the fact that you should never use headbutts. I'm sorry. They should look cool. I don't know. I know it's ridiculous. I do it anyway. I apologize in advance. I'm fully aware that they're not smart to do. And
see, but any parent that has had a toddler go back with that right there breaks your nose. It's the worst, and it hurts like heck. So
it just catches you right here. It's still, it's like the utter shock of it. It's just like, what? Just, oh gosh.
I'm actually pretty forgiving in fight scenes, especially if it's entertaining, or like I like that sort of lull in the conversation where there's a little bit of humor, there's a little bit of self-reflection, and which goes into the who has time when you're fighting for things. My pet peeve is when characters are in the middle of fighting for their lives or running for their lives, and they stop to be like, have this long, passionate kiss. Because if the ship is on fire or there's a monster chasing you, you're not going to stop to shag. Leave that for later. The survival matters. But I get the cinematography, just like the spinning around makes the pretty outfit that you're wearing or the really dramatic coat that you're wearing flash. But normally I'm really happy just to read a good fight scene. My big pet peeve is boats, but everybody knows that. So don't write a boat wrong.
So Fran, you actually had mentioned before that you would love to talk about considerations for massive scale fight scenes with not hand in hand at all, but like mechs or spaceships. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I love that. I mean, issues of scale, hand-to-hand combat is one thing, but when you've got, groups or countries or planets fighting each other, that whole sense of scale goes right up. And the massive problem of what could possibly go wrong gets multiplied infinitely. And whether you're fighting with a big mecha, which is just 1,000 times worse engineering-wise for stuff that can break, engineering panel at 2, by the way. The thing that really does make me want to read stuff like that goes all the way back to naval battle fiction, where you don't, the author's job is to steer our gaze as far as where to look, but keep us aware that there's tons of stuff happening sort of in the middle ground and the background too. And so those big scale fights are great opportunities to write the individual perspective and the broader sort of big glorious sweeping landscape scene at the same time.
Yeah, I have a big space battle in my sequel. It's coming out in September, and it was interesting doing all the research about that, because when you start talking about space battles, yeah, you can kind of default to the Star Wars method, which is always very exciting and cool. You've got people, in tiny ships zipping around doing stuff like that. But a lot of space battles can occur, like we're talking like light seconds. We're talking about being really far apart from each other in ways that you physically can't see the other ships, and you're just using technology to track it. And so that could be very complicated when you try to bring in realism, and then realism looks like boring, and trying to figure out ways to make that engaging and make it interesting when basically all you're doing is checking blips on a radar and then utilizing the, Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest SOB in space principle to just launch stuff in the general direction of wherever you think they're going to be in the next few seconds. And so, like you said, just keeping the POV on things, tracking who's doing what, who's making what choices, what the stakes are throughout, and trying to keep people engaged via kind of what instruments are they using? Are they trying to escape? Are they trying to attack? What are their goals in that particular moment? And how are they going to accomplish them? How much ammo do they have left, if that's a consideration? How much shielding do they have left, if that's a consideration? And just what kind of evasive maneuvers is their ship physically capable of taking? Stuff like that. I mean, you have to know your technology, you have to know your world building, and a lot of that, kind of like Henry was saying before, it can just dictate the terms of engagement. It's knowing the physical capacities of the various tech that you're using.
I mean, what Valerie was just saying is really great, because fighting is about limits and about, what if you're gonna run out of stuff faster than your opponent, whether it's energy or bullets. And, the bullet count question, definitely, if you've got, an infinite supply of bullets, I wanna know where you got that thing, because that's, But it's also about the sort of the America's Cup problem. When they first started televising the America's Cup, everybody was like, yay, this will be great, this will be gorgeous. They discovered it was really, really boring. And they had to figure out ways to make the race more interesting. And part of the way that they did that was talking about the individuals and what they were putting into it and their strategic decisions, both before and after. And they got really into the engineering of the boats too, which is something that, if you fire a weapon that's going to take 2.5 light years to get somewhere, then you have to you have to figure out the scale of your fight in a really different way.
Yeah. So I'll pose one more question to the panel before we start to take a few from the Discord. So what happens when your fight scene is done and it's published, or it's about to be published, and you're at a convention and you're going to read your fight scene? What are some considerations for reading your work out loud? Henry, I think you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's something I've thought about a lot, because I do a lot of presentations, especially for schools. And so the question becomes, how physical is your reading of this, and how much of the reading is invested with gesture, and what are you trying to accomplish here? So I think one of the things is, it depends on the type of writing, the type of action scene that you're writing. Is it one that lends itself to being enacted, and are you going to have fun enacting it? I find that the thing that I'm writing, Kung Fu figure skating, is something that nobody's ever seen before. So the goal of it is to leave the impression of having seen it without having seen it. And so when I do readings, they're very, very physical. So I'll say something like Suki launches at Doi with a triple phoenix spin, iron cleaver jump. Doi defends herself with the legendary 5-point Kingfisher sporting in the Purple River quintuple jump. Now, you have no idea what those moves actually look like, but you're left with the impression, like the after image of having seen that. And so that's kind of the goal.
I felt that.
That's
but
so good.
Thank you. But I think the thing is, it depends on the type of fight scene. There are scenes I can think of where that would actually detract from it, because it is about the psychological battle between them. So if you have all these pyrotechnics in the delivery of it, it could distract from the intended focus of that fight scene. So I think it depends on. I think that writers should be flexible. I think all writers should take an acting class, because I think it's the best possible thing for your dialogue. Take an acting class and see how it affects the way that you decide to read a fight scene, because you might find that there is a whole different way to deliver it. There are things that are meant to be read and things that are meant to be heard and things that are meant to be seen, and they're not all the same things.
And I think, like Henry was alluding to, consider your audience. I mean, if you're reading to a group of kids, they're gonna love it if you get really physical. I mean, they're gonna eat that up, and that's awesome. Versus if you're doing it in front of adults who are maybe a little more jaded, and depending on the context of the fight scene, they may look at you like you have just lost your brain.
Yeah. Or high schoolers. God, they're the worst.
Oh my gosh, they're like, what are you
No,
doing?
I love them. I love them. But no, I think also the dynamics, like reading a fight scene means even if you don't, if you aren't able to jump around, or you're not in a situation where jumping around is logical, using your voice to up the tension. Don't read in a monotone. That's sort of the baseline. And never read after Henry, because he will steal your audience's heart and walk away with them. And that was amazing. Can you do this thing again? Because that was really cool. There, yes, that.
I'm trying to make this a 3D experience.
Yeah.
I want to hear from Melissa though, because I feel like I want to hear.
Oh, okay. If actually, you know what? I have not read a fight scene from any of my books aloud. That said, I know that one thing I like to do when I'm writing them, which I think applies to reading them aloud as well, is to include and on the page I do it more with white space, but to include little pauses, like to control the pacing of it very carefully, because complex things are happening in a fight scene, both emotionally and physically, and your reader needs to be able to parse them. And there are these dramatic moments, and I like to give them space. So if someone gets stabbed, I don't want them to get lost in the middle of a paragraph. I want people to be able to just sort of like let that hit and give them space to feel the impact both emotionally and physically. So even though you may be tempting because the action is very fast and it's racing by, but to have those pauses built into it to let the blow land.
Just like characters need time to react to things, readers also need time to react to things. And then just like syntactically, physically, orally, you need to kind of give them that room. Yeah.
Unknown caller. It's 5 minutes, folks.
Thanks, Gary.
Sure.
We'll go ahead and grab some questions from the Discord. Sid asks, do you have any tips for keeping fight scenes concise? How many beats are ideal?
I feel like it really depends on how big this fight is, what's happening in it. Like if it's just, I think if you have a lot of character or plot important moments happening in it, you can get away with it being longer. If this is just a fun little skirmish on your way to something, then you want to keep it much shorter. I think that having turning points is important in the fight. If it's just all one note, it's gonna feel like you're grinding in like a random map fight in a JRPG. So, I think it's more about the particular fight and like an ideal length.
This question comes from, let's see, Lexiconia. She asks, Valerie, talking about research, how much did you play Portal for that big fight scene in Chilling Effect?
Oh my God, so many times. So Portal, and not just one player, but two player, because the key in that scene was that it was two people involved. And so you had to keep an eye on what each gun had shot and where. And so that, man, I went over that scene so many times just to make sure, okay, did I keep track of who had shot what? Which surface was it shot on, so that I knew when they came through what would be the physics of it. Going back to what Fran was saying, okay, if it's on the floor and they jump down, then they're going to be kind of launched out, versus if they're walking through it and then kind of coming up from a floor, which that didn't happen in the book, but like just keeping in mind the physics of it. And yeah, it was, whew, I reread that scene so many times just to make sure, did I get everything correct? And I also played the game a lot. I had to always take breaks because I get really motion sick, especially in games like Portal. But yeah, you could tell I'm a fan.
That's the only time I've ever cosplayed was a Portal cosplay, because we dressed up and my friend dressed up as GLaDOS, but this is completely off topic. I'm sorry for the questioner, but we got an orange hula hoop and a blue hula hoop, and we're basically just running around her, and it was fun. I'm not very good at cosplay, but that was great. I love the idea though. Did you draw a flow chart for like the physics of it, or did you just check it?
No, I just checked it very carefully. Yeah, I'm not a very artistically inclined person, so unfortunately that does not help me usually. But yeah, I am a very kind of like visual writer, which means that I often don't put the things on page that are happening in my head, and I always have to go back and be like, did I write that down? Okay, let me make sure that it's clear. So.
Right.
I think we have time for one more question. This one's from Matthew. He said, in writing a fight scene, how is a skilled fighter character and an unskilled one different for you?
Oh.
Super different. I mean, I want to leave other people look like they have opinions too, but I think a lot of it is in terms of how they react to what's going on. I think someone who is not skilled and experienced is going to be much more overwhelmed. And at that point, if it's from their perspective, the way I'm describing it is going to be much less, I may know what's happening in the fight, but they're just gonna be like, whoa, where'd that guy come from? Oh my God, no, now somebody's dead, you know, and things are exploding. Whereas if they're skilled, they're gonna be analyzing more and be like, I need to accomplish this. That guy looks like he's weak. I'm gonna hit him when he's not paying attention, and be much more aware of what's going on.
You just described my paintball experience. The only time I played paintball.
Yeah, I mean, having gone through HEMA training, that's very much like when you have a very unskilled fighter versus a very skilled fighter, it can actually sometimes be weighted in the unskilled fighters very slightly, only because they're very random in what they do. Whereas the skilled fighter, it's going to be a lot more instinct and training and stuff kicking in. And when you have two skilled fighters together, it may slow things down because they're both recognizing kind of the skill in each other. And like Henry was talking about the fights in Hero, stuff like that. The very first fight between Donnie Yen and Jet Li was very much almost like entirely mental in the way that it was, because they're both very skilled fighters, and they both kind of like played it all out and knew what was going to happen before it even happened. So.
If you want to read some really great fight scene writing that does sort of that build and the learning curve, and some great training montages as well, although they're not really called training montages, Fonda Lee writes amazing fight scenes. Zero Boxer is fantastic, but also the Jade City books, really great fight scenes, sort of all the way along the curve. I just wanted to put a plug in for that before we ran out of time.
I think that does wrap us up. Thank you so much, Valerie, Melissa, Fran, and Henry.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure. Everyone in the Discord is excited.
I will take care of everybody being dismissed.